In today's video, we are going to talk about the worst decisions Sony has made regarding PlayStation. In today's video, we are going to talk about the purchase of Bungie. Something that happened a while ago but is now back on the table. Because it seems that we know what specifically Bungie is doing now. With all the money that Sony and PlayStation invested in them, which was not little, not at all. That's right, we're going to talk about the juicy projects that Bungie is developing right now to enrich the PlayStation catalog. Excellent games. And as I don't want to leave anyone out of this topic, I'm going to give a brief introduction and I'm going to put everyone in the loop so that everyone knows what we're talking about. And also to put it into perspective, the magnitude of the mess they made with Bungie. Microsoft announced the acquisition of Activision Blizzard on January 18th, 2022. This deal was presented as one of the largest purchases in gaming history. Microsoft would spend about $70 billion to buy Activision. This acquisition would be completed much later after overcoming various regulatory challenges and all the drama that we have already lived and already know about this acquisition. When the purchase of Activision by Xbox was announced, Sony's response was not long in coming, and at that time it was Bungie. Sony announced the acquisition of Bungie on January 31st, 2022. An agreement that focused on strengthening PlayStation's capabilities to develop and maintain live and online multiplayer games. With Bungie being a kind of independent studio, but at the same time advising PlayStation studios. We believe that Bungie can offer us much more than a $70 billion acquisition of Activision, said at the time the chief executive officer of PlayStation, Jim "Wonderful" Ryan, who surely at that time was very confident that things were going to go well for sure, and he didn't expect Bungie to become the worst investment of PlayStation of all damn times. Which is not only a bad investment, because Bungie is literally doing nothing, but also because the purchase of Bungie encouraged the purchase of other great investments by this business genius. You might think that this is the second worst investment that Sony could have made in history, after that of Bungie. It's that of Firewalk Studios, exactly the year following the acquisition of Bungie. Which you already know is the studio responsible for Concord. We also already know how Concord did, don't we? It lasted 2 weeks and nothing more. And Firewalk Studios, which cost much less than Bungie, is a direct consequence of the purchase of Bungie. The goal of buying Bungie was to have online multiplayer, but it was also to have people with experience in online multiplayer who could advise PlayStation on how to manage teams and even generate future acquisitions. The purchase of Firewalk comes a year after that of Bungie. That is, yes, Sony bought Bungie for their advice. Bungie was directly involved with the purchase of Firewalk, so if we want to aggravate the situation a bit, we could consider that Bungie is to blame for Concord. It may sound a bit tangled, but it has some logic. I don't know if Sony would have bought Firewalk Studios if they hadn't started with this whole multiplayer plan and hadn't trusted so much in the vision or the experience of the people at Bungie. Who, by the way, Bungie advised during the launch of Concord. Well, the purchase of Firewalk is Jim Ryan's fault. But let's also put it in Bungie's bag to make things a bit more dramatic. Well, finally Firewalk closed, Concord closed, everything dissolved. You already know the story. And what happened to Bungie? Well, there it is, kind of soon to close, right? Maybe 2 or 3 more bad decisions and we lose Bungie. As I was saying, Sony buys Bungie to support in the development of games as a service. More than 10 games to be precise. It was said that there were about 12 games. But last year, Sony decided to cancel several of these titles. Many driven by the utter failure of Concord, others that were already seen as not going well. Of course now, without so many multiplayer projects, with Concord being a failure, Sony starts to cut staff. And one of the main affected is Bungie. Because they were not meeting their goal, the goal for which they were acquired, In October of 2023, Bungie carries out massive layoffs that affect approximately 8% of its employees. In July of 2024, another round of layoffs is announced. Roughly 200 employees, 17% of their staff. And also, it was decided to relocate 155 employees, which would be one of what was left, to other Sony studios to reinforce the integration with Sony PlayStation. Of all the remaining Bungie employees of the entire studio, a percentage was ripped out and introduced into different PlayStation studios to generate internal teams and things like that. And the whole Bungie unit ended up resulting in two parts, which we are going to call Team A, which would be the team dedicated to Destiny, the main Bungie team, and Team B, which is a team they formed as an interim studio in charge of PlayStation studios. I don't know what the numbers are, but today Bungie must have half the staff it had when it was acquired by PlayStation. The Studio A. Team A is in charge of Destiny 2 with content updates, releases, and other things. And it is supposed that Destiny 2 is more or less what keeps this team alive. That is, what justifies that this team is formed today. Because it is supposed that Destiny 2 is a game that does generate profits. Although it was reported that last year they generated half of the profits they had promised PlayStation they were going to generate. We don't know official figures, but we have these statements that the goal was not met last year with Destiny 2. Because apparently when the purchase of Bungie by Sony PlayStation took place, the studio promised PlayStation many things that were not fulfilled regarding the income from Destiny. In addition to Destiny 2, Bungie is working on this. Announced in May of 2023, with no gameplay to date, Marathon is an extraction shooter, focused on PvP. It would be like the first new game from Bungie in many years, in an entire decade. Marathon shares the same name as the classic installment from the 90s. This new title would be a reimagining, not a continuation. It will release on PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series as a multi-platform game, and on PC simultaneously, with compatibility for crossplay and multi-platform save, because in the middle of the agreement that Ryan closed with Bungie, they committed to making Bungie a multi-platform studio, which was already a questionable decision in addition to the purchase of Bungie itself. They say, you know what, the games that they are going to develop, publish them wherever you want. Well, do you remember that I told you there was a Team B? Well, Bungie's Team B is the one that would be developing a new game. A wonderful new experience. Amazing. The codename of the project that Studio B is developing is Gummy Bears. And we don't have gameplay, we only have some data. This title would be a hybrid between a multiplayer online battle arena, a game like League of Legends, and a game like Super Smash Bros. That is, a kind of mix that in theory would seek to be a competitive but accessible multiplayer experience. They now say, and it's like the news and the present, that this title they are developing would be focused on a younger audience. $3.6 billion for a multiplayer online battle arena, which we don't understand what it's about, that supposedly has elements of Super Smash Bros. For 2 Destiny 2 updates that were delayed. I'm not going to talk about the quality because I'm not a Destiny 2 player. And Marathon. That's what Sony PlayStation got with the purchase of Bungie. And it gets worse when we start to understand that, of course, they wouldn't have bought Firewalk Studios. They wouldn't have bought Concord. Concord launches it. With the supervision of Bungie. Supervision. Currently the most expensive investment of Sony PlayStation. Of all time, at least that we know of in the purchase of a studio, is a Bungie. And they are making 2 games. 2 Marathon, and the other that Bungie is not actually making. It is being made by people who are inside Bungie and now work directly for PlayStation Studios. They no longer trust them. Tremendous. There are 2 more games that were directly influenced by Bungie's purchase. And one of them is Fair Games. This is a heist title of thefts with online multiplayer, PvP and PvE. This game would not have been cancelled yet. It would still be in development. And it would be the very last thing Bungie got their hands on. The studio responsible for this game is Haven Studios, which supposedly was formed to make this game and nothing else. Then it was acquired by PlayStation, under the tutelage of Bungie. And Fair Games should come out at some point this year, at least that's how it was announced. The second multiplayer that supposedly Bungie people got their hands on is the multiplayer of Horizon, which we also do not have confirmed, nor do we know too much about it. But it is supposed that it is there for some job searches that have been appearing lately. As a final fact, just to give a little dimension to all this and know how much money we are talking about, because many times we talk about billions and we are not used to working or seeing that amount of money. Maybe we don't understand the magnitude of these things. I'll tell you that the last very big purchase that PlayStation had made before buying Bungie was Insomniac Games. Yes, the developers of Spider-Man, the developers of Ratchet Clank, and so on. This happened in 2019 and Sony paid $230 million. $230 million. It really was a good deal. And the studio from 2019 until now has launched Spider-Man, Miles Morales, Spider-Man 2, and Ratchet Clank Rift Apart for $230 million. On Bungie, they spent the equivalent of about 12 Insomniac games. That is, if they had invested that money well, they could have bought 12 studios of the caliber of Insomniac Games that have delivered 3 major titles to PlayStation in 5 years. Doing a bit of very simple math, if they had invested that money well instead of Bungie, they would not only have not lost money with other horrible titles like Concord. No, but Concord is good and had good mechanics. If it was so good, why did it die? If they had invested that money well, maybe Sony would now have a catalog with 15 or 20 more exclusives from all that well-invested money. Not all acquired studios will be as successful as Insomniac, although things worked out very well for them. However, so if you were wondering what happened to Sony's big investment with Bungie, now you know it was Marathon, it was Gummy Bears, and Destiny 2. Hey! Put me down here in the comments, you who are not CEOs of video game companies, or much less that are simply mortal players like me. Where could Sony have spent that money that would have been much better than Bungie? Put me in the comments. What studio should Sony have bought with $3,600,000,000? I read your answers, because surely all of them are going to be better options than Bungie. Maybe we should all be PlayStation CEOs. I don't know. I say, see you next time.
Bye.